Okay, let's start with something that might completely blow your mind. Did you know that on any given day, there are actually more people experiencing symptoms of a sexually transmitted infection than the common cold? Right? It's a staggering reality, yet it's something we almost never talk about openly. Well, welcome to today's Explainer. I am so glad you're here with us. Today, we're going to demystify STIs. We're going to leave all the awkwardness at the door and lean entirely into the clinical, fascinating medical facts. Here is our roadmap for today's Explainer. We'll be looking at 5 key areas: the invisible STI pandemic, myths and risk factors, viral infections, or the incurables, the HIV and AIDS crisis, and finally, bacterial STIs, the curables. Let's get right into it. So let's start with a massive level-setting question. Did you know half of all people will contract an STI at some point in their life? Literally half. And if you happen to fall into the 15 to 24-year-old demographic, you're actually in the highest risk group, acquiring nearly half of all new infections. STIs are not some rare anomaly, okay? They are an incredibly common, shared human reality. Now, what's absolutely crucial to understand before we go any further is the deep psychological weight of this topic. As our sources point out, STIs tend to stir up a ton of fear. And tragically, disgust is often extended beyond the disease itself and projected onto the person. Our mission today is to shatter that stigma. We're going to replace that deeply rooted fear with solid clinical medical facts. Okay, Section 1, the invisible STI pandemic, uncovering the hidden numbers. When you look at the actual numbers, the demographic reality is wild. The vast majority of reported chlamydia and gonorrhea infections occur right in that 15 to 24-year-old age bracket. So this isn't just a hypothetical risk, right? It makes the issue incredibly urgent and highly relevant to young adults today because it's happening right now, predominantly in this exact age group. Before we look at the broader landscape, we really need to get 2 vital medical terms straight. Think of prevalence as the estimated number of total existing infections at any given time. So that's both new and old cases combined. Incidence, on the flip side, refers only to the entirely new infections that occur within a specific time frame. Applying those definitions, the massive scale of permanent infections hiding in the U.S. population right now is just staggering. Take HPV, for example. We are talking about over 42 million existing cases. That's followed by HSV2 with over 18 million cases. These are largely silent, permanent residents living within the population. Moving right along to Section 2, myths and risk factors, separating fact from fiction. Let's do a rapid-fire myth-busting session because there are some really dangerous misconceptions out there. Myth, condoms don't work. Truth, when used correctly, they greatly reduce your transmission risk. Myth, no symptoms means no STI. Truth, many infections hide completely. In fact, asymptomatic spreading is a primary reason STIs are everywhere. And another big one, myth, only vaginal or anal sex transmits infections. The truth, activities like oral sex, needle sharing, and even do-it-yourself tattoos carry very real transmission risks. So, you might be wondering, if the facts are this clear, why do people still take these risks? Well, our sources define a fascinating psychological concept called alcohol myopia theory. Essentially, under the influence of alcohol, our brains are biologically driven to focus heavily on immediate, feel-good behaviors, like sexual arousal, while completely ignoring future negative consequences. It perfectly explains why so many sexual risks are taken in the heat of the moment. Let's transition into Section 3, viral infections, the incurables, and managing the permanent. Okay, the absolute key here is understanding the mechanics. Viral STIs literally invade your body's cells to replicate. That means killing the virus often means killing the host cell itself. This makes them mostly permanent, though they are highly treatable. Contrast that with bacterial STIs, which simply harbor in bodily fluids like semen or vaginal secretions. Because they aren't hijacking your cells in the exact same way, bacterial infections are mostly curable with straightforward antibiotics. When we actually dig into specific viral infections, their silent nature is what's really striking. HSV2, which causes genital herpes, is 90% asymptomatic. 90%. And transmission can happen through something called viral shedding, meaning the virus spreads even when there are absolutely no visible sores. HPV is the most common STI in the US, and while it's mostly harmless, strains 16 and 18 can cause potentially deadly cancers. But here is the amazing, empowering news.
We now possess incredibly safe and effective vaccines to prevent those cancer-causing HPV strains entirely.
Another viral STI you should know about is the hepatitis B virus, which often physically manifests through jaundice. That's a severe yellowing of the skin and the eyes. Hepatitis B attacks the liver and is primarily spread when contaminated blood or bodily fluids enter the bloodstream of an uninfected person. Now, while there's no cure, most adults do clear the infection within a few months, and an effective vaccine is now totally routine for infants. Moving into Section 4, we're tackling one of the most profound, deeply stigmatized, and world-altering public health crises of the last century, the HIV and AIDS crisis.
To truly understand HIV, we have to look back at its history. Researchers actually believe the simian version of the virus crossed from primates to humans in Africa somewhere between 1894 and 1924. But it wasn't until June of 1981 that the CDC published a report on rare opportunistic infections popping up in gay men. Then, by 1983 and 1984, researchers finally discovered the retrovirus that was responsible for destroying the immune system, which leads to AIDS.
Let's look at the stark clinical realities of how HIV is actually transmitted. Initially, symptoms are often just flu-like or totally non-existent. Shockingly, during the first 5 to 6 months of an acute infection, the virus is 8 to 10 times more likely to be transmitted. Anatomically speaking, the risk of transmitting HIV through unprotected anal intercourse is 18 times greater than vaginal intercourse simply because rectal tissue is more easily damaged. And sadly, experts are noting a dangerous modern trend called safe sex fatigue, which is a loss of tolerance for practicing safe sex due to the success of modern treatments, and that is actively driving up new cases. But here is the massive turning point, the introduction of antiretroviral therapy, or ART. The moment ART is introduced, death rates literally plummet, while the number of people surviving and living long lives with HIV climbs steadily. Medical science transformed what used to be a guaranteed death sentence into a highly manageable, long-term chronic condition. And the medical triumphs don't stop there. We now have PrEP and PEP. PrEP, or pre-exposure prophylaxis, is medication taken by an HIV-negative person before a potential exposure to drastically reduce their chances of transmission. PEP, or post-exposure prophylaxis, involves taking medications after a potential exposure to stop the virus from ever establishing a permanent infection in the body. This is actionable, empowering medical intelligence. Finally, we arrive at Section 5, Bacterial STIs, the curables, and taking control. Let's break down the facts on chlamydia, because it is the most commonly diagnosed bacterial STI in the US. Remember our whole theme of silent infections? While 75% of females and 50% of males with chlamydia are completely asymptomatic. It survives in vaginal secretions and semen, and it is incredibly contagious, easily transmitted in just a single encounter. But the absolute best takeaway here is that a simple test and a round of antibiotics can completely cure it before it causes any long-term damage like pelvic inflammatory disease. So what does this all mean? We have covered a lot of ground today, from the invisible scale of these infections hiding in plain sight to the incredible medical advancements we have to manage and even cure them. So I want to leave you with this provocative thought. With half of us encountering an STI in our lifetimes, how will you use these medical facts to protect yourself, communicate openly with your partners, test regularly, and finally help end the stigma? Knowledge is power, but only if we actually use it. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning and stay healthy.